Hello, everyone. I am Sammy. I am helping Jennifer with her I Am Witch book Instagram page.
Hi, Sammy. So my name's Jennifer Lehr, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I also am the author of a book called I Am Witch, which is not out yet.
Now called Love's Cauldron.
Do you want to kind of talk a little bit about what the book is?
I've been writing for many, many, many years, but I've never done much with my writing. I was having a reading with a clairvoyant, a very good one who's in England. And she said, "You're supposed to write a book." Now, I've always known I was supposed to write a book. I just busy with life, and so I never wrote a book, even though I did a lot of writing. So I was like, oh, she's right. I do need to write a book. So I went through all my files and computers and notebooks and that go back, 30 years. And I'm like, oh, I have all this writing. And I started pulling out pieces that were important to me and putting them together and then linking them, because you can't just put a whole bunch of pieces together and have a book. They actually have to relate to each other. And as I was writing, at some point I realized I was talking about intuition. I was talking about opening up the divine feminine, the part that feels and honors the body, and the opposite of the masculine, which is more logical and rational. And I started realizing I'm writing about the parts of us that are witches. And so it evolved. I didn't know I was writing. I didn't even know I was a witch, really. I just know I do things that are witchy, and I never called myself a witch. And I was like, oh, I actually have to call myself a witch, because witch has been this bad word. And what people have done to witches has been horrible. And it's actually really good things to be a witch.
So people get a little taste of what they might get to see sometime soon here.
Yeah.
So that kind of brings us into our first question. When did you first start calling yourself a witch?
So that would have been in the last year. Like a year ago, probably.
Pretty recent.
Pretty recent. And I've done witchy things. I mean, I work with a pendulum. I have the ability to channel. I've done a lot of witch type work, but I never called myself a witch. So once I was getting into the book, then I was like, oh, I actually have to embrace this. So that's how it happened. Yeah.
Next question is, how do you use a pendulum?
So in 2007, and this is going to tie in with another question you're going to ask me. In 2007, I took a 10-day training, full-time 10-day training called Soul Memory Discovery in San Diego area. And we worked with pendulums and bringing in our guides and past lives. And that is where I learned how to work with a pendulum. And so here's a pendulum. And everybody's different, but the pendulum works off your magnetic energy. And so you have to be grounded and hydrated and focused generally. And I say, show me a yes. That's a yes. And I'll say, show me a no. That's a no. So for me, a yes is counterclockwise and a no is back and forth. And I've had it be different. It's changed. And so working with a pendulum, you usually want to ask a yes, no question to start, especially when you're learning. And eventually, you'll reach a point where you can, if you've got the right equipment in terms of who you are, where you actually get images, or you see things, or you know things, or you hear something. So it depends what you're doing and how focused you are and what kind of space you're in. So I do a lot of yes and no questions, and sometimes I ask more and get more detail, or I'll hear something. So it's something you develop. It's a skill. And it's an intuition skill, really, because you're working with, the assumption is, which, my belief is that we're in a universe with more than people and what you can see with the physical eyes and the five senses. So there's other, beings, that people have crossed over, and pets, and there's all these energies. I get visited by my cat Hank, who passed away. He comes and visits me, and I working with the pendulum, and all of a sudden it's going nuts. I'm like, what is going on? It's like, who's here? And I ask, and then, oh, it's Hank. So, so it opens your world up, really.
Yeah. And it's funny because that actually reminds me of, I don't know if you know of the old wives' tale of when you're pregnant and they do it's like a pendulum, and it shows either a girl or a boy based on which way the field is moving the item. And I think for us, it was right when we tried it with like,
oh, wow.
Yeah, it showed that she was going to be a girl, and then she was a girl. So I don't know. That's what it reminded me of, though.
It's a similar thing. You're asking for assistance or guidance or the answer. And if you have the right thing, and there's an ability for the answer to come through at will.
Yeah, it was very cool. So, and then how do we change outcomes by working in the depths is the next question.
Okay, so that's a tricky question because that's a big question. And I want to just back up to the other question really quick because I forgot to say something. And that is, I always say I invited all my guides, I ask to be surrounded by light, and I ask that only accurate information come through, and any unbalancing energies that wish to approach be instantly transmuted into love by the light. So I set up a sacred space. Okay, so now outcomes by working in the depths. So, when I was much younger, when I was 25, someone gave me a deck of tarot cards. That was a long time ago. And I started playing with them. And then when I went back to grad school, which is quite a while later, which was a depth school, Pacifica Graduate Institute, which is Jungian and deals with depth psychology, I started learning more about the depths. And I have done a lot of work in the interim between those two times of working with parts and psychology and having therapy and doing a lot of internal work. So I'm going to use the cards as an example. Let's suppose you lay a reading down, you do a reading for someone, and you get a really painful card, heartbreak. Yeah. You have to actually work with the person, talk to the person about what is going on in their life, why are they experiencing this pain, and what can they shift in themselves? Is it an attitude or an expectation, or is there something they're learning? So you start going into what's happening at a deep level of the psyche, and what is that pain asking for? So that's sort of how I would that's a way of working with the changing outcomes, because you change energy as you work with things, as you explore. So
and then the next question is, what is healing?
What is healing? Healing, the definition of healing, if you look it up in the etymology of the word, I believe healing means to make whole. So to heal is to bring the broken pieces together and create wholeness. And so when you're working with humans or whatever, there's many kinds of healing. There's emotional healing, spiritual healing, just different ways of healing on the relational level, healing on the personal level, healing on the level of the planet. There's, different levels, different types, but it's all about integrating things that are in conflict, broken, not in harmony.
Why did you write I Am Witch?
Now called Love's Cauldron.
I sort of covered that a little bit, but
I was just going to say, we kind of talked a little bit about this.
Yeah, I've always been very driven in the outer world and had to do a lot of inner work to sort of get myself together enough to be able to make something happen in the outer world. It just wasn't going to happen by itself. I came into the world with too many deficits. That's how I put it. So when I started writing this book many times, and I have a folder in my computer from, I think, 2011, 2012, with hundreds of pages of writing. And some of that went into the book, where I was trying to write the book, but I was also trying to create this app, this Reconcile app.
Yeah.
It wasn't an app then, it was an online thing at the time, which involved more training and learning more about couples and a lot of writing and figuring out how you actually organize materials so people can learn. So there was no, and I came down with Lyme disease in 2009. So I was incapacitated in terms of physical energy. Right. And I was so weak, I actually couldn't talk on the phone with my friends. I didn't have enough energy. I slowed my practice down. I eventually stopped it for a while. And I got involved in creating this educational thing and trying to write a book. And it was clear that I couldn't do both. So I had to put the book aside. And then when I got this reading from this woman and she said, "Oh, you're supposed to write a book," I was like, "Oh, maybe now's time." And so what I did is, instead of just, because I still had a lot of work to do on getting this thing turned into an app, is I, every morning for an hour and a half to 2 hours, the first hour and a half to 2 hours, I wrote. And then the rest of the day I did everything else I had to do. And that's how otherwise it never would have gotten done. So I had to reorganize my life around it. That's how I did it. Yeah.
The next question is, why do you think you are a witch? I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah, you like that one too. Yeah, it's a good one. Well, I'm really sensitive to energy. When I was writing Reconcile, I used the pendulum. I would be looking at these pages and pages of psychological information about how to help couples, what couples do. And I'd be like, how do I organize it? And I would actually hear that paragraph or that page needs to go to chapter 3, page 2, second paragraph. I mean, I actually heard,
Wow.
I got help. It was because I would have had to have a 200 IQ to do it, which I do not have,
Right.
obviously. So I got help. I'm the same with the book. I couldn't have done that without. You look at people who are musicians and writers and all kinds of people who do all kinds of different things. They're channeling. They might not call it that or know it, but stuff's entering their mind. These thoughts happen and they're hearing something and they're going, oh, well, where do you think that came from? It's
Right.
not
I
always...
feel like that's how we make decisions a lot of times, is you take in what your feelings are about things, and that's how you decide, well, those feelings come from somewhere.
Some people feel, some people hear, some people see, different people have different ways of accessing information. Yeah. And some people have a couple of different ways. I hear really well and clairaudient. So I'll actually hear sentences. So it's as you get older and you've worked with your intuition, you start understanding who you are and what your abilities are, and you should develop them more. And I think anybody who's on the planet, what an opportunity to develop that part of yourself, because we all need guidance systems. It's really hard figuring out how to get through the chaos of the planet. And
especially now.
And so the more help you can get, like, I'm all for it. Yeah. So that's how I would answer that question, which I no longer remember.
It was why you think you're a witch, which.
Yeah, so that's part of it. I'm sensitive. I definitely have, I work with a pendulum. I've done work where I've taken people into past lives and helped alter things, bring healing. Like, I have a lot of ability. That work was too hard for me. It left me with splitting headaches.
Well, yeah, and you feel the emotion. Yeah.
You feel the emotion and you're pulling in stories.
Yep.
And it takes a lot of brain power for me. There are people that I think can do that kind of stuff effortlessly. I'm not one of them. I wouldn't call myself a psychic. I would call myself someone clairaudient and someone with the ability to heal. People who are psychic sit down with someone and they can, well, you should write a book and this needs to happen and that needs to happen and da-da-da. I mean, I wouldn't put myself in that category.
Right.
But you can be a witch who's psychic or a witch who's not. I mean, there's different kinds of witches out there.
Yeah, so. Awesome. And then kind of our last question for you is to discuss SMD.
That's Soul Memory Discovery, and that's the class I took. It's outside of San Diego. The woman who teaches it, her name's Ellen Kaufman-Dosick, and she's been teaching. She's actually a licensed clinical social worker, and she worked with people for years and years and years as a social worker. She's very talented, and she developed, or was given probably, this way of working where you work with the pendulum and you work with words. So incantation is the wrong word, but she creates these little things that you say that actually shift energy. Where you might say, I stand here in power and I honor the divine feminine. You're putting out words that change vibration. Okay. That was a 10-day training I did. And that's where I learned, like, oh, this is really interesting. And it opened up a whole world for me. And I used to go see her once a year for a couple of years before that, just to have a reading, because I love readings. I think they're so fun. Astrology, psychic, whatever. I love reading. And I said to her, probably saw her first in 2005, and then I saw her in 2006, and then I saw her, and then maybe I saw her in 2004 first, but I said to her, one of the readings, I said, because I knew she did trainings, do you think it would be good for me to do this? And she put out her pendulum and she got a yes. I was like, okay, it seems like really weird and strange, but I'm going to do it. And I did it, and I love it. It opened up a whole new door. She is soulmemorydiscovery.com if you wanted to look her up. And she does do trainings, and I would call it fairly advanced, but I didn't know anything when I started. So you have to be sensitive, and so you discovered an ability you have by doing the training.
Why do you think you are a witch? If you're someone who would call yourself that, why do you think you are one? I guess I had never really thought of myself as a witch before we started chatting, and then you noticed different things, kind of how it happened for you a little bit.
Because we're taught that witches wear, these black hats and they fly off on broomsticks and cast evil spells, and unless they're, the good witch of the Wizard of Oz.
Right.
We have a history of what we've done to the feminine in this world. I mean, we still have genital mutilation going on in parts of the world. I mean, there's horrible things that go on to women. Not that men have an easy job out there either. So it just to think about, well, what parts of me really are honoring the feminine, and what parts of me really work with intuition, or am I just in the logical, this is how it has to be kind of place? It's a big cauldron.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's good to think about what parts of you might be a witch, and or want to develop those parts of yourself.
Right. Because I think
Really.
I'm definitely the person who I believe in signs, and I believe in, your loved ones visiting you and things like that. And I think that all kind of ties into that question. Well, thank you so much for answering all those questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Sammy.